The scream that tore through the December night came from somewhere beyond the ridge, and Xander Hayes knew without question that whoever made that sound was going to die, unless someone reached them fast. He had been riding back to his small ranch outside Hachita, New Mexico, after delivering a string of horses to a buyer in Silver City. The journey had taken longer than expected, and now the winter storm that had been threatening all day was finally making good on its promise. Snow fell in thick curtains, driven sideways by a wind that cut through his heavy coat like a blade. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, picked his way carefully along the trail, his breath coming out in great white clouds. When the scream came again, Xander turned Copper toward it without hesitation. He had to lean forward in the saddle, squinting against the snow that stung his face. The temperature had dropped so fast that ice was already forming on his mustache and the edges of his hat. He pushed Copper up the rocky incline, trusting the horse's sure footing in the darkness. At the top of the ridge, he spotted movement below. A figure was stumbling through the snow, falling, getting up, falling again. Even from this distance, Xander could tell the person was in trouble. They wore no coat that he could see, just what looked like a dress, and they were moving with the desperate, uncoordinated motions of someone losing the battle against the cold. He urged Copper down the slope, calling out as he went. The figure turned at the sound of his voice, and in the dim light he could make out a woman's face, pale as the snow itself. She tried to move toward him, but her legs gave out and she went down hard. Xander was off his horse before Copper had fully stopped. He ran to the woman and dropped to his knees beside her. She was shaking so violently he could hear her teeth chattering. Her lips were blue, and her eyes had that glazed look of someone who had been too cold for too long. She wore only a thin cotton dress that was soaked through, and her feet were bare, already showing signs of frostbite. "What happened?" he asked, but she could not answer. Her jaw was locked with cold, and all she could do was make small whimpering sounds. Xander did not waste time with more questions. He stripped off his heavy sheepskin coat and wrapped it around her, then lifted her in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and she curled against his chest instinctively, seeking any warmth she could find. He carried her to Copper and managed to get into the saddle with her still in his arms, settling her across his lap. He wrapped his arms around her, sharing his body heat, and turned Copper back toward the trail. The ranch was too far. In this storm, carrying double weight, they would never make it before the woman died of exposure. Xander knew these mountains well, though, and he remembered a lined shack about 2 miles east. It was not much, but it would have walls and hopefully some firewood. He kicked Copper into as fast a pace as he dared in the snow. The woman in his arms had stopped shaking, which was a bad sign. Her breathing was shallow, and her skin felt like ice against his neck where her face pressed against him. He held her tighter, trying to will his warmth into her. "Stay with me," he said into her ear, not even sure if she could hear him. "Just stay with me. I will get you warm." The ride to the lined shack felt like it took hours, though it could not have been more than 30 minutes. By the time the small structure appeared through the snow, Xander's arms were aching, and his own body was starting to feel the dangerous creep of cold. He had given his coat to the woman, and his vest and shirt were soaked through with melted snow. He dismounted carefully, keeping the woman secure in his arms, and kicked the door of the shack open. It was pitch black inside and smelled of dust and old wood, but it was out of the wind. He carried the woman inside and laid her on the floor as gently as he could, then went back out to see to Copper. The horse needed shelter too. There was a lean-to attached to the side of the shack, just big enough for one horse. Xander got Copper inside and quickly stripped off the saddle and bridle, rubbing the horse down with handfuls of straw that had been left there from some previous use. He would have to trust that Copper's thick winter coat would be enough to keep him warm. Back inside the shack, Xander fumbled in the darkness until he found the small shelf where he remembered a lamp being kept. His numb fingers finally closed around it and he shook it, relieved to hear the slosh of oil inside. He found matches in his vest pocket. His fingers so cold he dropped 3 before he managed to strike one and get the lamp lit. The warm glow revealed a single room with a crude fireplace, a wooden bunk with a thin mattress, and a few supplies scattered on a makeshift table. Most importantly, there was a stack of firewood next to the hearth. Xander went to work immediately, building a fire with hands that shook so badly he could barely hold the kindling. He got it lit and fed it carefully until flames were crackling and starting to throw real heat. Only then did he turn his full attention to the woman. She lay exactly where he had left her, curled on her side, his coat still wrapped around her. Her eyes were closed, and for one terrible moment he thought he was too late, but then he saw the faint rise and fall of her chest. He knew what needed to be done. He had seen men die from exposure before, had heard the stories from old trappers about how to save someone who had gone too far into the cold. The wet clothes had to come off. They had to be warmed gradually, not too fast or it could stop their heart. And they needed to be kept conscious if possible. Xander knelt beside her and touched her shoulder. Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered but did not open. He tried again, shaking her a little more firmly. This time her eyelids lifted slowly. Her eyes were a startling blue-green like the surface of a deep pool, but they were unfocused and confused. "I need to get these wet clothes off you," he said, speaking clearly and calmly. "You will die if I do not. Do you understand?" She stared at him for a long moment, then gave the tiniest nod. He worked as quickly as his cold fingers would allow, untying the laces of her dress and pulling it over her head. Beneath it, she wore a thin chemise and drawers, both as wet as the dress. He removed those two, trying to be respectful, trying not to look more than necessary, but focused on the goal of saving her life. There was a rough blanket on the bunk and he grabbed it, wrapping her in it. Then he stripped off his own wet vest and shirt, his fingers fumbling with the buttons. His undershirt was damp but not soaked, so he left it on. He moved the thin mattress from the bunk and dragged it close to the fire, then lifted the woman onto it. She was shivering again, which was good. It meant her body was trying to warm itself, but it was not enough. Xander had seen this before too. He needed to share his body heat with her, skin to skin if necessary. There was no room for modesty when life and death hung in the balance. He lay down beside her on the mattress and pulled her against him, wrapping his arms around her and pulling the blanket over both of them. She was so cold it was like holding a corpse, but he held her anyway, rubbing her back and arms, trying to create friction and warmth. Her face pressed against his chest and he could feel her breath, still shallow but steady against his skin. "That is it," he murmured. "Just breathe. Just keep breathing." The fire crackled and slowly the shack began to warm. Xander kept rubbing her arms, her back, trying to get her blood flowing. Her shivering intensified, which he knew was a good sign. Her body was waking up, fighting back against the cold. After what felt like an eternity, she stirred against him. He felt her hands, which had been limp, curl into fists against his chest. Her breathing deepened. He looked down and saw her eyes were open again, and this time they were clearer, more aware. "Where am I?" Her voice was barely a whisper, raw and raspy. "A lined shack in the mountains outside Hachita," Xander said. "I found you in the snow. What happened to you?" Her eyes filled with tears and she started to shake, but this time it was not from cold. "My husband," she said, and the word came out bitter. "He threw me out. In the storm, he said he was done with me. Anger surged through Xander, hot and fierce. What kind of man would do such a thing? Where? Where is your house? I do not know, she said, and the tears spilled over, running down her cheeks. I just ran. I was so scared, and then I was so cold, and I could not think any more. Xander tightened his arms around her. You are safe now, he said firmly. He cannot hurt you here. She looked up at him then, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. Her gaze traced his face, taking in his dark eyes, the stubble on his jaw, the concern written clearly in his expression. You saved my life, she said. Anyone would have done the same. No, she said softly. No, they would not have. They lay there in silence for a while, the fire warming the small space, the storm howling outside. Gradually, color returned to her face, and her shivering eased. Xander could feel her body warming against his, could feel her heartbeat stronger and steadier against his chest. What is your name? He asked finally. Flora, she said. Flora Collins, or it was Collins. I do not know any more. Xander Hayes, he replied. And for what it is worth, Flora Collins, I am glad I found you when I did. She closed her eyes and pressed her face against his chest again. He thought she might have fallen asleep, but then she spoke, so quietly he almost missed it. Thank you. He held her through the night, keeping the fire fed, listening to the storm rage outside. At some point he dozed off, exhausted from the cold and the effort, and when he woke the storm had passed and pale winter sunlight was filtering through the cracks in the walls. Flora was awake, sitting up with the blanket wrapped around her, staring at the dying fire. Her hair, which he now saw was the color of autumn wheat, hung in tangles down her back. She turned when she heard him move. Good morning, she said, and there was something fragile in her voice, like she was not sure what came next. Xander sat up and added more wood to the fire. How are you feeling? Warm, she said, and a small smile touched her lips. Thanks to you. He nodded and stood, moving to check the supplies on the shelf. There was not much. Some coffee, a bit of cornmeal, some jerky that had seen better days. Are you hungry? I am, but I do not want to take your food. Our food, he corrected. And you need to eat. You have been through something terrible. He made coffee in a battered pot and mixed the cornmeal with water to make a simple mush, cooking it over the fire. They ate sitting on the mattress, the blanket draped over Flora's shoulders. She ate slowly, like she was remembering how. I need to ask you something, Xander said when they had finished. Where is your husband now? Where is your home? Flora's hands tightened around the tin cup of coffee she held. We lived about 10 miles north of Hachita, a small homestead. He got it in his head that I was unfaithful to him. I was not, I never was, but he had been drinking and he would not listen. He dragged me outside and told me to get out, that if I ever came back he would kill me. She looked down at her cup. I believed him. We need to get you to town, Xander said, to the sheriff. What he did is attempted murder. No, Flora said quickly. Please, I just want to be away from him. I do not want to go back there, not even for a trial. I just want him gone from my life. Xander studied her face, saw the real fear there. All right, he said finally. But you need somewhere to go. Do you have family? Friends? She shook her head. I came out here with him 2 years ago from Missouri. My family is all back there. His family is dead. I have no one. Then you will come to my ranch, Xander said. The words came out before he had fully thought them through, but once they were said, he did not take them back. It is not fancy, but it is warm and it is safe. You can stay there until you figure out what you want to do next. Flora stared at him, her blue-green eyes wide. I cannot ask you to do that. You have done so much already. You are not asking, I am offering. He stood and began gathering their things. Your old dress is by the fire. It should be mostly dry now. We need to head out before another storm comes. Flora dressed behind the blanket he held up for her, and though the dress was wrinkled and stained, it was at least dry. She had no shoes, so Xander wrapped her feet in strips he tore from an old flour sack he found in the corner. It was not ideal, but it was better than nothing. They rode double on Copper, Flora sitting in front of Xander so he could keep an arm around her. The sun was bright on the new snow, making everything sparkle like diamonds. The ride to Xander's ranch took a few hours, following trails that wound through juniper and scrub oak. The ranch, when they arrived, was modest. A small house made of adobe with a tin roof, a barn that had seen better days, and corrals that held a few horses. Smoke curled from the chimney, which surprised Xander until he remembered that his hired hand, Miguel, was supposed to be checking on things while he was gone. Sure enough, Miguel emerged from the barn as they rode up. He was a man in his 50s with a weathered face and kind eyes, and those eyes widened when he saw Flora. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "I was worried about you in that storm." "I am fine, Miguel. This is Miss Flora Collins. She ran into some trouble. She will be staying here for a while." If Miguel had questions, he was too polite to ask them. He simply nodded and helped Flora down from the horse. "Welcome, Miss Collins. I will get the house warmed up more and see about some food." Over the next few days, Flora slowly came back to herself. She had frostbite on 3 of her toes, but Miguel knew a trick with salve and careful bandaging that seemed to help. She was quiet at first, jumping at sudden sounds, but gradually she relaxed. Xander gave her his bedroom, and he slept in the main room on a bedroll by the fire. She protested, but he would not hear of it. He learned things about her in bits and pieces. She was 23 years old, just 2 years younger than him. She had married her husband when she was 21, believing he was a good man. He had been at first, but the isolation of the homestead and the hard work had brought out something dark in him. The drinking had started a year ago, and with it came jealousy and anger. "I kept thinking it would get better," she told Xander one evening as they sat by the fire. Miguel had gone home to his own family in Hachita. "I kept thinking if I just tried harder, if I just did things right, he would be the man I married again." "It was not your fault," Xander said firmly. "What he did to you, that was his choice, not yours." She looked at him with something like gratitude. "How are you so sure?" "Because I have seen good men and bad men, Flora. A good man does not hurt someone weaker than him, especially not someone he promised to protect." The words seemed to settle something in her. She nodded and turned her gaze back to the fire. As the days turned into a week, then 2, Xander found himself looking forward to the evenings when they would sit together. Flora began to help around the house, insisting she needed to earn her keep despite his protests. She cleaned and cooked, and the house began to feel like a home in a way it never had when he lived there alone. He tried not to notice how the firelight made her hair glow gold, or how her laugh, rare as it was, made something warm bloom in his chest. She was a woman recovering from trauma, he reminded himself. She did not need him developing feelings for her, but the feelings came anyway, stubborn and insistent as the spring that would follow this hard winter. One afternoon in late January, Xander was working in the barn when he heard a horse approaching. He looked out to see a man riding up, a big man on a bigger horse. Something about the way the man sat, aggressive and angry, put Xander on alert immediately. The man dismounted and stalked toward the house. Xander intercepted him halfway across the yard. "Can I help you?" Xander asked, his voice level but his hand resting casually near the pistol on his hip. "I am looking for my wife," the man said. "Flora Collins. I heard she might be here." So this was him. Xander studied the man who had left Flora to die. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the mean set of his mouth and the hardness in his eyes. "Heard from who?" Xander asked. "That does not matter. Is she here or not? And you are?" "Thomas Collins, her husband. Now where is she?" Xander crossed his arms. "Miss Collins is under my protection. She does not want to see you." Thomas's face flushed red. "She is my wife. She goes where I say she goes. She is a person," Xander said quietly, "and she has made her choice." Thomas took a step forward, his hand moving toward his own gun. "You have no right to keep her from me. I have every right to protect someone who asks for protection." Xander did not move, did not reach for his gun, but his stance shifted slightly, ready. "You threw her out in a blizzard to die, Thomas. Whatever rights you had as a husband, you lost them that night." "She tell you that?" Thomas laughed, an ugly sound. "She is a liar. She probably told you all sorts of stories, made herself out to be innocent." "I do not need her stories," Xander said. "I found her in the snow, half frozen, with no coat and no shoes. The evidence speaks for itself." Thomas's hand closed around the butt of his pistol. "I am not leaving without her." "Yes, you are." The voice came from behind Xander. He turned his head slightly and saw Flora standing on the porch of the house, wrapped in a shawl. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. "I am not going with you, Thomas," she said. "I am never going back." Thomas moved fast, pushing past Xander and heading for the porch. Xander was faster. He grabbed Thomas's arm and spun him around, putting himself between the man and Flora. "You heard her," Xander said. "Time for you to leave." Thomas swung at him. Xander ducked and the fist whistled past his ear. He came up with a punch of his own that caught Thomas in the stomach, doubling him over. Thomas recovered and charged like a bull, driving his shoulder into Xander's chest and sending them both to the ground. They rolled in the dirt, exchanging punches. Thomas was bigger, but Xander was quicker. He managed to get on top and landed 2 solid hits to Thomas's face before the bigger man bucked him off. "Stop it." Flora's voice cut through the sound of their fighting. "Both of you stop." Xander got to his feet, breathing hard. Blood dripped from a cut on his lip. Thomas stood too, his nose bleeding, his eye already starting to swell. "This is not over," Thomas said, spitting blood into the dirt. "Yes, it is," Flora said. She came down from the porch and walked to stand beside Xander. "I want a divorce, Thomas." "I will get a lawyer and I will get a divorce and you will leave me alone." "You think any judge will grant you a divorce?" Thomas sneered. "You are my wife. That is the end of it." "We will see," Flora said. "But either way, I am not going back to you." "You can accept that or you can make trouble, but it will not change anything." Thomas looked between them, his face twisted with rage. For a moment, Xander thought he would rush them again, but then something seemed to deflate in the man. He spat once more and turned back to his horse. "You are both going to regret this," he said as he mounted up. He kicked his horse hard and rode off at a gallop. Flora swayed on her feet and Xander caught her elbow, steadying her. "Are you all right?" "I am now," she said, but her voice shook. "I was so scared. I saw him through the window and I just froze." "You came out anyway," Xander said. "That was brave, or foolish." She looked up at him and saw the blood on his lip. "You are hurt." "It is nothing." She reached up and touched his face gently, her fingers soft against his bruised jaw. "You fought for me." "Of course I did." "Why?" Her eyes searched his. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Xander knew he should say something practical, something about basic human decency or Christian duty. But looking down at her, at the way the winter sun caught in her hair, at the hope and fear mingled in her expression, he could not lie. "Because you matter, Flora," he said. "You matter to me." She drew in a sharp breath. Her hand was still on his face and her eyes were bright with tears. "Xander," she whispered. He wanted to kiss her. The want was so strong it made his chest ache, but she was vulnerable and scared, and he would not take advantage of that. So instead he stepped back, gently removing her hand from his face. "We should go inside," he said, "in case he comes back." She nodded, looking down, and he thought he saw a disappointment flicker across her face before she turned toward the house. That night they sat by the fire again, but the easy comfort that had developed between them was strained. Xander could feel Flora's eyes on him, and every time he looked at her, she glanced away. Finally, he could not stand it anymore. "Flora, about what I said earlier, did you mean it?" she interrupted. He met her gaze. Every word. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded in her lap. "I am still married," she said finally. "Even if I do not want to be, even if I never go back to him, in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of God, I am still his wife." "I know. But I do not feel like his wife anymore," she continued, and her voice broke. "I have not felt like his wife for a long time. I feel like a prisoner who escaped. And now that I am free, I do not know what I am supposed to do. I do not know what I am allowed to want." Xander moved from his chair to sit beside her on the couch. He did not touch her, but he was close enough that she could reach him if she wanted. "You are allowed to want whatever you want," he said. "You are allowed to want to be safe, to be happy, to start over. What if I want more than that?" She turned to look at him, and her eyes were full of something that made his heart race. "What if I want things I have no right to want, Flora?" He said her name like a prayer and a warning both. She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You gave me your warmth when I was freezing," she said softly. "You gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go. You fought for me when I could not fight for myself. How am I supposed to not fall in love with you?" The words hit him like a physical blow. He stared at her, at this woman who had been through so much, who was so much stronger than she knew. "You do not have to. I love you," she said, and this time her voice was stronger, sure. "I know it is too fast, and I know it is complicated, and I know I am still legally married to a man I hate. But I love you, Xander Hayes, and I needed you to know." He lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "I know," he said. "I know, Flora, because I love you too." She made a small sound, half laugh and half sob, and then she was in his arms, holding him tight. He wrapped himself around her and buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her. They sat like that for a long time, just holding each other, the fire crackling beside them. When they finally pulled apart, Flora was smiling through her tears. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now we get you that divorce," Xander said. "However long it takes, whatever we have to do. And then, if you will have me, I would very much like to marry you properly." "Yes," she said immediately. "Yes, I will have you, today, tomorrow, forever." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, a promise of all the days to come. The next morning, Xander rode into Hachita with Flora. The town was small, just a scattering of buildings along the railroad line, but it had a lawyer. His name was Samuel Pierce, and he had an office above the general store. Pierce listened to Flora's story with a grave expression. "Divorce is difficult in New Mexico territory," he said when she finished. "The courts do not grant them lightly." "But he tried to kill her," Xander protested. "He threw her out in a blizzard. And if we can prove that, we might have a case for extreme cruelty, which is grounds for divorce." Pierce looked at Flora. "But it will take time, months, maybe longer, and your husband will fight it." "I do not care how long it takes," Flora said. "I just want to be free of him." Pierce nodded. "Then I will file the papers. We will need witnesses, people who can testify to what happened." "I can testify," Xander said. "I found her in the snow." "That will help," Pierce said. "Are there others?" "Anyone who saw the state you were in, Flora," Miguel, Xander said. "My hired hand. He helped care for her when we got to my ranch. He saw her frostbite, how sick she was. Good. I will want to talk to him. Pierce made notes on a piece of paper. There is one more thing you should know. Your husband could contest this by claiming you abandoned him. If you were living with another man, even innocently, he could use that against you. Flora's face fell. What are you saying? I am saying appearances matter. For the duration of this case, it might be best if you were not living at Mr. Hayes's ranch. The words felt like a knife to Xander's gut. He had just found her, just admitted his feelings, and now they were supposed to be separated. Flora clearly felt the same way. Where am I supposed to go? Pierce thought for a moment. There is a boarding house here in town, run by a widow named Beatrice Kimball. She takes in women sometimes. I could speak to her on your behalf. Flora looked at Xander, her eyes full of distress. He wanted to argue, to say it was ridiculous, but he knew Pierce was right. They had to do this properly or they risked losing everything. All right, Flora said finally, if that is what it takes. An hour later, Flora was installed in a small but clean room at Beatrice Kimball's boarding house. Beatrice was a stout woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and a no-nonsense manner, but her eyes were kind as she showed Flora around. You are safe here, she told Flora. I do not allow men in the rooms and I do not tolerate any foolishness. You need anything, you come to me. Xander helped carry Flora's few belongings up to her room. They had stopped at the general store and bought her a few basic necessities, clothes and shoes and toiletries, all of which Xander insisted on paying for despite her protests. When it was time for him to leave, they stood in the doorway of her room, neither quite ready to say goodbye. This is not forever, Xander said. Just until the divorce is final, I know. Flora took his hand. I just got used to seeing you every day. I will visit, he promised. As often as I can. And you can come out to the ranch as long as Beatrice or someone else comes with you. We will make this work. She nodded and stood on her toes to kiss him, soft and quick. I love you. I love you too. The weeks that followed were among the hardest of Xander's life. He threw himself into work on the ranch, repairing fences, training horses, anything to keep his mind occupied. He rode into town 3 times a week to see Flora, always careful to keep their visits proper, usually sitting in Beatrice's parlor where they could be seen. Flora found work helping at the general store, which gave her something to do and a little bit of money of her own. She was good with the customers, and the store owner, a man named Henry Webb, was pleased with her work. In March, Thomas showed up in town, drunk and angry. He went to the boarding house and demanded to see Flora. Beatrice met him at the door with a shotgun and told him in no uncertain terms that if he did not leave immediately, she would shoot him where he stood. The sheriff, a man named John Crawford, happened to be walking by and escorted Thomas out of town with a warning not to come back. The incident strengthened their case. Sheriff Crawford wrote a statement about Thomas's behavior, and Pierce added it to the file. By April, spring had come to southern New Mexico in full force. The desert bloomed with wildflowers and the days grew longer and warmer. Flora seemed to bloom too. The scared, fragile woman Xander had found in the snow was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more sure of herself. One Sunday in May, Xander took Flora on a picnic. They rode out to a spot he knew, a little canyon where a spring created a pool of clear water and cottonwood trees provided shade. Beatrice came along as chaperone, but she tactfully busied herself with a book, while Xander and Flora spread a blanket by the water. I have news, Flora said as they ate the sandwiches she had packed. Samuel Pierce sent word yesterday. Thomas has agreed not to contest the divorce. Xander sat up straight. What? Why? Apparently he met another woman, someone in Lordsburg. He wants to marry her, which means he needs to be free of me as much as I need to be free of him. "That is wonderful," Xander said and meant it. "How long until it is final?" Samuel thinks another month, maybe 6 weeks at the most, 6 weeks. After all this waiting, 6 weeks seemed like nothing. Xander took Flora's hand. "And then you will marry me," she smiled, that beautiful smile that made her whole face light up. "The very day it is legal if you will have me." "I will have you," he said, and kissed her. The divorce was granted on the 21st of June, 1886. Judge Howard Matthews signed the papers in his chambers in Silver City, officially dissolving the marriage between Flora and Thomas Collins on grounds of extreme cruelty and abandonment. 2 days later, on the 23rd of June, Xander and Flora were married in the small church in Hachita. It was a simple ceremony with only a handful of people in attendance. Miguel and his wife Rosa, Beatrice Kimball, Samuel Pierce, and a few others who had become friends to Flora during her time in town. Flora wore a dress that Beatrice had helped her make, simple white cotton with lace at the collar. Xander wore his best suit, the one he had bought 5 years ago and hardly ever had occasion to wear. They stood in front of the pastor and said their vows, promising to love and honor and cherish each other for all the days of their lives. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Xander kissed Flora with all the love and joy he had been holding back for months. The small congregation clapped and cheered. After the ceremony, everyone gathered at Beatrice's boarding house for a meal. Rosa had cooked enough food to feed twice their number, and there was music and dancing. As the sun set, Xander and Flora said their goodbyes and rode back to the ranch together, truly together for the first time. The ranch house was the same as it had always been, but it felt different now. It felt like home in a way it never had before. Xander carried Flora over the threshold, making her laugh, and set her down gently in the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hayes," he said. She wrapped her arms around his neck. "I have been waiting months to hear you say that." That night, and all the nights after, they were finally free to love each other without reservation or fear. They learned each other slowly and sweetly, with patience and tenderness and joy. In the months that followed, they built a life together. Flora proved to be as capable with horses as Xander, with a gentle touch that the animals responded to. Together they expanded the ranch, buying more land, breeding better horses. Miguel became not just a hired hand but a true friend, and his family became like family to them too. One evening in December, nearly a year after Xander had found Flora in the snow, they sat together by the fire. Snow was falling outside again, but this time they were warm and safe together. Flora had been quiet all day and Xander had noticed, but had not pressed her to talk. Finally she set down the sewing she had been working on and turned to him. "I need to tell you something," she said. Something in her tone made his heart skip. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am more than all right," she said, and took his hand, placing it on her stomach. "I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment Xander could not speak. He looked from her face to his hand on her belly and back again. "A baby," he finally managed. "Are you happy?" she asked, and he heard a trace of uncertainty in her voice. "Happy," he pulled her into his arms. "Flora, I am beyond happy. I am everything good there is to be." She laughed and cried at the same time, holding him tight. "I was afraid you might not want children yet. We have only been married 6 months. I want everything with you," he said fiercely. "Children, a life, every day until we are old and gray. All of it." Their son was born in August of 1887, a healthy baby boy with his mother's blue-green eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him Samuel, after the lawyer who had helped free Flora, but they called him Sam. Being a father was the greatest terror and the greatest joy of Xander's life. He had never held anything so small and fragile, and the weight of responsibility was crushing. But when Sam wrapped his tiny hand around Xander's finger, when Flora sat in the rocking chair Xander had made and nursed their son while humming softly, he knew that everything in his life had led him to this moment. Flora was an incredible mother, patient and loving. She sang to Sam, told him stories, carried him everywhere in a sling Miguel's wife had shown her how to make. But she also remained a partner in running the ranch, returning to work within weeks of Sam's birth, refusing to be relegated to the house. "I spent too long being told what I could and could not do," she told Xander when he suggested she might want to rest more. "I will not live that way again." "I would never try to tell you how to live," he assured her. "I just want you to be happy and healthy." "Then trust me to know my own limits," she said, and kissed him. "I will ask for help when I need it." When Sam was 2 years old, Flora became pregnant again. This time she gave birth to a daughter, Anna, in the spring of 1889. Anna had Flora's golden hair and Xander's dark eyes, a striking combination. Sam, now old enough to understand he had a sister, was fascinated by her, always wanting to help rock her cradle or fetch her blanket. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work and love. The ranch prospered. They added cattle to their horses, built a new barn, hired 2 more hands to help Miguel. Sam and Anna grew strong and healthy, running wild on the land that was their birthright. In 1892, Flora suggested they should try to contact her family back in Missouri. She had not spoken to them since leaving with Thomas, and she wanted her children to know their grandparents and aunts and uncles. Xander thought it was a good idea, so Flora wrote a letter. The response came 2 months later. Her family had been worried sick when she stopped writing, had even tried to contact Thomas, but he had told them she had left him, and he did not know where she had gone. They were overjoyed to hear she was alive and well, remarried to a good man, and the mother of 2 beautiful children. The following summer, Flora's parents made the long journey west to visit. They stayed for a month, doting on their grandchildren and getting to know Xander. Flora's mother, Margaret, told Xander privately that she was grateful he had saved her daughter, that she could see Flora was truly happy for the first time in her life. "You gave her more than shelter," Margaret said. "You gave her back herself." Those words stayed with Xander long after Flora's parents returned to Missouri. He thought about them on the cold December morning in 1895, 10 years to the day after he had found Flora in the snow. They were sitting at breakfast, Sam now 8 years old and Anna 6. A third child, a boy they had named William, was just learning to walk at 14 months. The house was full of noise and life and laughter. "I want to take you somewhere today," Xander said to Flora. "Beatrice said she would watch the children." Flora raised an eyebrow. "Where? You will see." That afternoon, they rode out together, just the 2 of them for the first time in months. Flora laughed as they went, delighting in the freedom of riding fast across open land. Xander led her to the ridge where he had first heard her scream that terrible night. He helped her down from her horse and they walked to the top of the ridge. From here you could see for miles, the mountains in the distance, the desert stretching out in shades of brown and gold, the sky impossibly blue above. "You know what today is?" Xander asked. Flora thought for a moment, then her eyes widened. 10 years, she said softly. 10 years ago today. "I have been thinking about that night a lot lately," Xander said, "thinking about how easily it could have gone differently. If I had left for home an hour earlier, if I had taken a different trail, if that storm had been just a little worse, I might never have found you." Flora took his hand. "But you did find me." "I did," he agreed, "and you saved me just as much as I saved you that night." "How did I save you?" "I was lonely, Flora. I did not even know how lonely I was until you came into my life. I thought I was content with just the ranch, just work and sleep and routine. But you showed me what it meant to really live, to love someone so much it terrifies you, to build a family, to wake up every morning excited for the day ahead because I get to spend it with you." Tears ran down Flora's cheeks. "You gave me everything," she said. "A home, a family, a life I never dreamed I could have. You gave me yourself. How do I ever thank you for that?" "You do not have to thank me," Xander said. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her just as he had that first night when she was freezing and scared. "You just have to keep loving me. That is all I have ever wanted." "That is easy," Flora said against his chest. "I will love you forever." They stood there on the ridge, holding each other as the winter wind blew around them. But they were warm, warmed by each other and by the life they had built together. 10 years ago, Xander had given his warmth to a freezing stranger. Today, he held his wife, the mother of his children, the love of his life. The years continued to be kind to them. Sam grew into a fine young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Anna was smart and spirited, her mother's daughter in every way. William, the youngest, was quiet but steady, always watching and learning. In 1902, when Sam was 20 and courting a girl from town, Flora and Xander sat on the porch of their house and watched the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to build. "We did good," Flora said, resting her head on Xander's shoulder. "We did," he agreed. "Better than good." "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked. "If Thomas had not thrown me out that night, sometimes," Xander admitted. "But then I remind myself that everything that happened, all the pain and the fear, it brought us here, to this life, to our children, and I would not change a single moment if it meant losing this." Flora lifted her head and kissed him, soft and sweet. "I love you, Xander Hayes. Just as much today as I did the day I first said it." "I know," he said, smiling. "And I love you too." Sam married his sweetheart in 1903 and brought her to live on the ranch. Anna left for college in 1904, wanting to be a teacher. William stayed home, happy to learn the ranch from his father. As the years turned into decades, Xander and Flora grew old together. Their children gave them grandchildren, and those grandchildren filled the ranch with life and laughter. Through droughts and good years, through loss and triumph, they faced everything side by side. In the winter of 1925, 40 years after that fateful night, Xander fell ill. He was 70 years old now and his body was wearing out. Flora, 68 and still strong, nursed him with the same fierce devotion he had shown her so long ago. On a cold December evening, with snow falling outside and the fire crackling in the hearth, Xander lay in their bed with Flora beside him, her hand in his. "You remember," he said, his voice weak but clear, "the first time you told me you loved me?" "Of course," Flora said. "I said I could not help but fall in love with you, and I said I know," Xander remembered, "because I already loved you too." "You gave me everything," Flora said, tears streaming down her face. "A whole life, a beautiful life." "We gave it to each other," Xander corrected gently. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, just as he had done so many times over the years. "Thank you, Flora, for every day, for every moment. I will love you forever," she whispered. "Even when you are gone, forever." "I know," he said one last time and closed his eyes. Flora sat with him until morning, holding his hand, remembering. She remembered being lost in the snow, so cold she wanted to give up. She remembered strong arms lifting her, a warm voice telling her to stay with him. She remembered falling in love, fighting for that love, building a life that exceeded her wildest dreams. Xander Hayes was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple stone marker. Flora visited him every day, telling him about the children and grandchildren, about the ranch, about life continuing on as it must. She lived another 7 years without him, surrounded by family, still strong and vital. When she died peacefully in her sleep in 1932, she was buried beside Xander, just as they had always planned. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren continued to work the ranch, passing down the story of how it all began. How a cowboy found a freezing stranger in the snow and gave her his warmth. How she told him she loved him and he said he knew. How from that one act of kindness, a love story for the ages was born. The ranch still stands today, passed down through generations of Hayes descendants. And every winter, when the snow falls on the New Mexico desert, they remember the couple who started it all. Two people who found each other in the darkest, coldest moment and built something that would last forever. That is the real magic of love, the family tells their children. Not that it happens, but that it endures. Through hardship and joy, through decades and generations, love endures. Just as Xander and Flora's love endured, warming not just themselves but everyone their lives touched, a flame that would never go out.